Welcome to another episode of Board Progression. Today we are reviewing Brian Head Resort in southern Utah. Now, as a local with over 500 days riding and filming for you guys in Utah, I'm doing video reviews of every resort in this state. I'm also doing a top 10 ranking video of all the resorts, so stay tuned for that. As a reminder, this is my opinion. This is what I'm looking for in a resort to cater to my style of riding. That being said, there's no such thing as a bad resort here in Utah. I love each and every one of them. So if a resort ranks higher or lower than you want it to, remember, we're just kind of splitting hairs here, okay? To review all the resorts, we're breaking things down into 7 categories that mean the most to me. Each category is getting a ranking of 1 through 10, and then we're adding up the totals of those 7 categories at the end to give you a final score. The categories are terrain and snow quality, length of season, lifts, amenities, and terrain accessibility, trail difficulty and variety, crowds and travel time, a category I'm calling customer service, and the final category is the overall vibe of the resort. At the end of the day, what's your impression of the resort and how stoked are you to go back to it? Now, before we get into those categories, let me tell you a little bit about Brian Head. It was originally known as Monument Peak and was used by expedition leaders and surveyors as a point of reference while traveling. At some point, the name of Monument Peak was changed to Brian Head, but nobody can agree on who changed the name and exactly why. Whatever the reason, eventually Brian Head opened as a ski resort with 1 chairlift in 1965, and by 10 years later, the town around it was established. Today, Brian Head has 650 acres of skiable terrain with 71 runs and 8 chairlifts. Interestingly, even though Brian Head is so far south, it has the highest base elevation of any resort in Utah at 9,600 feet. It has a peak elevation of 11,307 feet and 1,707 feet vertical. They claim they get an average of 360 inches a year, and last season, for the 2023 season, they finished with 419 inches. Day passes range from $29 a day if you get them early enough in advance, and they go up to maybe 100. I'm not exactly sure if you get them the day of in a peak part of the season. They also offer half-day tickets at the window the day of, but you can't get those in advance, and their website doesn't show exactly how much they are. I wasn't aware of this until I did some research, but they are on the Power Pass along with Nordic Valley here in Utah and 8 other resorts in the US. Now let's get into those scoring categories. The first one's gonna be terrain and snow quality. We are giving them a 4 out of 10. Now, with an average annual snowfall of around 360 inches a year, they just can't compete with northern Utah, unfortunately. But being at a higher base elevation does help the snow that they get to be quite good. On that base alone, we would have ranked them higher, but this category also covers terrain, and their terrain is kind of lacking. With only 1.7 thousand feet of vertical, there's a lot of beginner and intermediate terrain, kind of like rolling hills, and not really any cliffy or technical zones. There is one area at the top that's outside of a backcountry gate that was not open when I was there, unfortunately, that did look pretty cliffy and had some kind of cool looking zones, but that wasn't open, and technically I don't think it's actually part of the resort. I think it's backcountry. A lot of the terrain has some slope and then flat, then slope and then flat. You get the idea. But those flat zones can be pretty tough, especially on a snowboard on a deep day. Now, the score could change in the future, as Brian Head has announced they are doing a huge expansion, more than doubling their terrain, but they said it could take several decades to accomplish. We'll talk more about that in the coming categories. Next category is length of season, and we're giving them a 6.5 out of 10. That's pretty good for a small resort, especially down south. This season, they really wanted to open on November 10th, which was the earliest that anybody in Utah claimed, but unfortunately the warm temperatures just couldn't cooperate, and they had to push that back a week. And last season, they stayed open all the way until May 7th, with the last 2 weeks being weekends only, which is good, but I think that's pretty rare. Usually they're closing mid to late April. Next category is going to be lifts, amenities, and terrain accessibility. We are giving them a 6 out of 10. As I mentioned, they have 8 chairlifts. 2 of them are high-speed quads, which are quite efficient. The rest of the chairlifts are a little bit older and a little bit slower. There are 2 base areas that are at the highest elevation of any base area in Utah. The first one being Great Steps. The Great Steps Lodge has a grill, a saloon, rentals, and a ski shop. And the second base area, the Navajo Learning Center, as you can imagine, is a little more geared towards beginners, but it has all your basic necessities, including a rental shop. As far as accessibility goes, between the 2 areas of the resort, it's not that easy to get back and forth between the 2. You can either drive from one to the other, or take a shuttle, or you can ski or ride down to the bottom of the Alpenglow lift and walk across a parking lot basically to get to the Wildflower lift, or vice versa. From the top of each lift, the accessibility to your terrain is pretty good. There are some flat zones, as I mentioned. There is some hiking to get to certain zones, but it's not too difficult. It'll be interesting to see where things go with the expansion and seeing how easily accessible terrain becomes then. The expansion is supposed to add 850 acres, more than doubling the resort's size and adding 7 lifts. And it's gonna add a 3rd lodge and base area. Now don't get too excited and think you're gonna ride all this awesome new terrain next year, because they said it's gonna be a legacy project and this could take up to 30 years to finish. Now the news of this expansion leads us into our next category, trail variety and difficulty. Now they're claiming that this expansion is gonna have a lot of expert and advanced terrain and a little bit of beginner terrain. But until that happens, we are gonna have to give them a 5 in this category. Now Brian Head is really fun to explore, but even on their map, there's only 2 small areas that have double black diamonds listed. And one of those areas is at the very top of giant steps, and I'm pretty sure you have to hike through a backcountry gate, although I do think they mitigate that area, which is good. For the majority of their runs and groomers, there are some twists and turns to them, but they're mostly just kind of fall line from the top of the lift down to the bottom. But I will say there's a lot of really fun cat tracks that intersect those runs that you can launch off of. And there's some fun side hits too. There's just no cliffs or chutes really, unfortunately. With one very small exception being Devo's Pitch. They do have a couple terrain parks, which is great. It's always appreciated. But when we were there, they weren't real creative, and they didn't seem to have many jumps in their terrain parks. They seemed more jib oriented, and they didn't seem to be upkept throughout the day very much. Before we continue, I want to take a second to thank all the subscribers out there. If you enjoy these videos, please hit the subscribe button and the thumbs up button. It helps me out a ton. Also, as we're reviewing Brian Head in southern Utah today, I've got my Utah Stance Shouldn't Matter art shirt on. You can pick up yours or any board progression merch in the link below, as well as stickers. That helps me out a lot, guys. And finally, Patreon members get 15% off all merchandise and stickers. The hugest thank you to the Patreon members out there. I'll be honest with you guys, this season is basically make it or break it for board progression. So anything you can do to help support what I'm doing is greatly appreciated. Moving on to the next category, we have crowds and travel time, and we are giving them a 7 out of 10. Now, Brian Head is much less crowded than any of the northern resorts, but it's also much farther away from Salt Lake City. And we're kind of making that our center point for all of these reviews. It is 3.5 hours driving from the center of Salt Lake to Brian Head, but that's 3.5 hours without any traffic, so it's kind of a pleasant drive. It's also about a 3 hours drive from Las Vegas. If you're heading down there from Salt Lake or Vegas, it might be a good idea to stay the night, especially if it's snowing. Some of those roads can get pretty gnarly on I-15. Brian Head has lodging on property, and they even have a lift ticket package that gives you a night's stay, or there's always Airbnb and other hotels in the area. The next category is going to be customer service, and we are giving them an 8.5 out of 10. They have free parking. Period. No reservations, no different times when parking rates increase, just free parking, first come, first serve, all the time, anytime. And you don't have to get there 3 hours before the resort opens to get a spot. Across the board, prices are very reasonable for their lift tickets, for their food, just cost of everything is pretty good down there. Their social media presence could be a little bit quicker responding to comments, but they seem to do a lot for the guests, trying to extend the season and begin the season early if they can. And we had really nice interactions with their staff and their ski patrol while we were there. It was awesome. And the final category is the vibe of the resort. We're giving them a 7 out of 10. Brian Head is on the Power Pass, but honestly, until this week, I'd never even heard of the Power Pass. So I'd say they still very much have that family run feeling you get from a mom and pop resort, which is really nice. It's a fun, lighthearted place to ride. It seems like there's a lot of friendly locals. There's definitely no powder panic there. It has some charm, but I honestly was hoping for a little bit more scenic views of the Red Rocks. I got this impression that there was tons of rock formations all around the resort, and there's a lot of really cool ones driving up to Brian Head, like the last couple miles, but once you're actually in the resort, there's one small spot where you can kind of see some red rocks off in the distance, but other than that, it's kind of bland looking, unfortunately. At the end of the day, I do want to go back, but I'm not dying to go back, if you know what I mean. All right, so let's add up the totals all together from these categories. We are going to give them a 44. Now on our ranking score, anything from a 40 to a 49 is gonna get a 4-star review. So we are giving Brian Head 4 out of 5 stars. Let me know what you guys think of this one in the comments, especially if you live down by Brian Head. I'd love to hear the conversation. Make sure you check out all my other review videos and the ranking video of the top 10 when that comes out. If you wanna see purely just shred eye candy at Brian Head, check out this video. If you like this video, please give a thumbs up. I hope you guys are progressing in anything and everything that you're doing. I love you all. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.